Okay, welcome everyone. This is the second of two patient information support sessions being hosted by Thrombosis UK as part of National Thrombosis Week activities. And we're really delighted that many of you have joined within the audience, and also to have this panel of people who either work in or have experienced thrombosis with us this evening. You'll all have chance, and we really welcome your questions. So please do use the toolbar. In your toolbar, there's a Q&A button. And if you press that, you can type in your questions and we will try to answer as many as possible. We've also had quite a few pre-submitted ones that we will try to bring in as well as we go along. But to start with, the session is being recorded. So if you want to go back and see it again, watch bits of it or share it with friends or family, within the next 2 days, it should be made available on the Thrombosis UK website. And we will email out to everybody as well once it's there with a link, so it's easy to find. Okay. So first of all, I'd like to introduce the panel. Well, we're really lucky to have Andrea Croft, who's Thrombosis UK trustee, and also a HAP project lead in Abattoir, this is always, Bro Morganwick University Health Board in Wales, where in 2015, the 3 hospitals in Andrea's health board were recognised as thrombosis exemplar centres. And Andrea has done a huge amount working both locally and nationally with Thrombosis UK to increase education and to support patient information. Marilyn is also a venous thrombosis nurse specialist at the DVT Clinic Doppler Department at the University Hospital Wales in Cardiff. She's developed a specific interest in the care of patients with diagnosis of venous thrombosis, as well as prevention of hospital-acquired thrombosis. And like Andrea, has worked closely with Thrombosis UK, raising awareness and producing patient information, whether that be written or in films. Alongside them is Annya, who many of you may have at least spoken to or had an email from and maybe have seen as well. Annya is the patient lead at Thrombosis UK, and Annya has both personal experience of thrombosis and also long-term experience of working within Thrombosis UK. She's enjoyed keeping active as well, so she has a great experience to add to this discussion this evening. And then we welcome Natalie, who was a patient representative. Natalie was rushed to hospital with her left arm at risk due to multiple arterial thrombosis. She received an emergency embolectomy and placed on an anticoagulant, and all seemed fine. But in June 2020, after a repeat blockage, she was once again admitted, and it happened again a third time just 7 days after. Following extensive investigations and some delay, she was recently diagnosed with lupus APS. However, Natalie was determined to get back her old life, and during lockdown, she decided to try to get fit and start up being active again. She studied and qualified online as a personal trainer and started running Couch to 5K. But as she says, most importantly, listen to your body. And tonight, I know Natalie will have so much personal experience and wise tips to share. And we also welcome Caroline. Caro in 2003 was very fit, probably the fittest she believes she has ever been, and enjoyed running and being an active hill walker. But in October 2004, just aged 34, after running a 10K, she came away with a stitch-like pain in her side. A little later, her leg swelled, and progressively, despite visiting A&E and her doctors, she became unwell. Until finally, her GP referred her for an urgent admission, and eventually a scan showed extensive clotting in her iliac veins, portal veins, and inferior vena cava. Very slowly, after a long period of time, Caro recovered and became increasingly active. In fact, so much so, and to my amazement, in 2020, she completed the virtual London Marathon. So I can think we have a fantastic panel here. I hope you will enjoy hearing from them and also posing your questions to them. And first, I'm going to go to Annya, because Annya hears from so many callers and inquiries. What are the key questions and concerns that you hear from around thrombosis and then regaining activity, Annya? You're on mute. That's it.
Sorry, I've
Okay.
muted myself because I need to apologise. I have a horrible sore throat, so I might cough and splutter a bit. I'm sucking a trusty Strepsil at the moment and hoping my voice is going to hang on for this, so fingers crossed. Well, you know, Joe, we often get calls to the helpline asking about exercise, And it ranges right the way through from people saying, can I exercise at all? You know, I'm sitting here and I've got my foot up and I'm scared that if I move, then it's going to move and go in my lung. And you get a lot of mixed messages, you find, through the hospital as well, because that you either don't get any information, or you get rather ambiguous information. And then we get some people who say, well, how much? You know, I used to run half marathons and now I can't walk down the road. Or what kind? Can I walk? Can I run? Can I cycle? Can I swim? We get the whole plethora of what can I do, what can't I? And I think another one is how much rest. People will say, you know, well, I go and I walk down the road for 10 minutes and I come back. Is that enough? Well, you know, should I be doing more? So it's a real broad spectrum of questions we get asked. And there's no definitive answer because every single person is different. You know, some people started off very fit, so they might be able to manage more. Some people started off and they weren't very fit, so they couldn't manage much before. They can probably manage even less now. It also has a lot to do with age. When I had a lovely lady a few weeks ago, it did make me smile. She's 82 and had a DVT, and she was saying, you know, well, I don't get out much, dear, you know, because I'm 82, but I'm aware that I should be walking. So we had a little chat about it, and I found out she's got a really nice big back garden. So I said to her, you know, why don't you just little walk around the back garden? Oh, we never thought of that, dear. Yeah. So they're all very, very individual, and so many factors have to be taken into consideration. My first send to is always the website. We've got a lot of really good information, basic information on there, written and videos. We've got the wonderful bath physiotherapists with their little snippets, which a lot of people say they find useful. And I always remind people that any exercise is better than no exercise at all, because immobility is one of the biggest causes of VTE in the first place.
Thank you, Annya. That is fantastic. Thank you. So can I go first to Karen, then I'll come to Natalie and ask, obviously, when in your, Karen, before you had a blood clot, you were very, very active. But could you just give a little sort of summary about how you were diagnosed and then how you felt afterwards, and especially around becoming active, whether it was just climbing the stairs or doing something a little bit longer or further?
Yeah, so my first episode is way back when, in 2004, and possibly because I was young, it took 3 weeks to diagnosis, by which time I was very poorly. I had an enormous leg, which the GP was very shocked by. I was in a wheelchair for a month with an elevating leg rest. My husband was pushing me up to Greenwich Park, where we used to live. Understanding as an occupational therapist I did how hard being in a wheelchair is, he certainly found out in that month. And then as I wore compression, which I'd been advised to do, but I understand now it's very hit and miss whether you get advised to wear compression. For me, it took away a lot of the swelling and the pain, which allowed me to get active. And for me, because I'd been active before, my determination, much like Natalie, was to get back to being fit. I was very young. I didn't see that I had a choice really but to be active, because I had a long road ahead. I was due to get married 6 months later. I wanted to be in a nice wedding dress without my compression, which didn't quite happen. I did end up wearing my compression on my wedding day. So I think for me, the trick was to stay consistent. So however far I went on one day, I would either try and match it or just go to the next lamppost the next day. And it took a long time. I would say after that very first episode, it took me 2 years to get back to running because my leg was so uncomfortable. And I continued to have that stitch-like pain in my side for a very, very long time, much later on, probably about 5 years. And then I had another episode of clots in 2018, but in a different place, so in my femoral and popliteal veins. But because I'd had that experience of recovery before, I probably started much earlier. I bought myself a recumbent bike and just sat in front of the telly in the evening for 5-10 minutes pushing away on my recumbent bike and building up that base level of fitness. And again, it was just about staying consistent and not giving myself the excuses. Again, your leg swells, you feel the pain. I can still sometimes feel a bit of a pain in my femoral vein when I'm out for a run. But I know it's just the underlying possibly scarring, pulling on other structures in my leg, and it's diminishing over time. So I would say it's very rare now, 3 years later, that I get a pain, possibly sometimes when it's cold. And I continue to wear compression. So I do sit with my job sometimes, and I wear compression. And yeah, that's really how I've got through. It's just been that consistency, building up my muscle strength, doing some resistance training with weights, because as we all know, that the muscles have a very powerful impact on pushing blood back up into the body. And I know I've got a lot of damage, so I'm relying on my muscles and my compression to really help me recover. So that's been my approach.
Thank you.
Really.
Thank you, that's really helpful. And Natalie, coming to you and asking you a very similar question, what was your experience and how did you feel when you first started trying to exercise or just be more active than you had been after your
Well, after the first bout of clots, I was too scared to exercise. I thought that it was way too frightening for me to even contemplate, because before the first bout of clots, I was very much into kickboxing. So I was about to do my black belt brown, my black belt. I just done my black belt brown stripe. And so I literally took a back step. I just thought, I can't. And then, so that was in October 2019. And then in March, just as lockdown hit, I thought I need to start doing something. So I thought, oh, you know what, I'll go out on the bike. How lovely to be able to have my hour exercise a day out on the bike. But I went over the handlebars and caused myself my second bout of clots. So a week after that, I had the third, and I was absolutely petrified. My vascular surgeon said to me, no cycling. And I took that literally as no cycling, no walking, no running, no nothing. And it wasn't until I would say maybe August 2020 that I just thought, I can't not do anything forever. I felt quite alone. I felt like nobody really understood what I was going through, and how frightened I was. You know, my husband was he was very supportive, but it was very much like, come on, you can do this. And so I started a group up on Facebook because I thought I wanted to find people who'd been through what I was going through and maybe get some strength and inspiration from them. So I started the group and I started to do 0 to 5K, not really expecting to be able to do very much, to be honest, because I'd never been a runner. And I finished that. And then I thought, oh, hold on. Okay, so if I'm careful, I can achieve whatever it is really that I want to achieve. I just have to be very respectful of my body and understand that if I am feeling a little under the weather, I just take a little step back. So then I went on to do, after lockdown, my first 10K, my first half marathon, and I'm currently training for the London Marathon in October. So, you know, it's just, I think it's one of those things where everybody on the group that I started, they've all got different stories and different ways of how they got themselves back into exercise. But for me, it definitely was, I suppose, reaching out to people that weren't in my circle and kind of learning from them, and at the same time developing my own skill set so that I knew how to listen to my body.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Thank you, really informative. Marilyn, can I ask you, one of the things that's coming through obviously is after a blood clot, it's not unusual for people to experience pain. And so to then go back to do any activity, and as Annya pointed out, that could be just walking around the house or the garden or something more longer or more challenging to certainly people like me, such as running. How long should they expect that pain? What might cause it? And how can they tell what's an okay pain and what's not an okay pain? Because it is so frightening.
It is, and I think it's really difficult for patients when they've had a clot to know when it's safe to start doing something. We would normally advise that you don't do too much for the first month or so, and I think that varies from centre to centre. And by too much, I mean we wouldn't advise that you started things like running, swimming, cycling, playing football, doing anything too extreme for the first month or so. Just gently walking around, elevating your leg in between. And listening to your body, as Annya said, it's always about listening to your body, and you'll start to recognize this is a new thing. You didn't have a clot before, now you've got a clot now, so you have to reset how things feel in your leg. And I'm sure Caroline and Natalie will agree that it's a different, sort of a new baseline that you've got, and that you've got to recognize what your body is feeling like when you're starting back again. So in regards to how long, it's really taking it a step at a time. We would normally literally say take it a step at a time, almost. Go for a short walk, see how your body's reacting to that. And if you don't have significant symptoms when you've done that short walk, then you slowly start to titrate it upwards. So if it's a walk to the park and back, or the next day it's a walk to the park and slightly further round, you build it up, build it up, build it up. As your body, in the early stages, you've got this new clot, the symptoms are going to be more significant when you've got this new fresh clot. And as that clot starts to settle, organize itself into something more solid and start to shrink, and the blood flow starts to improve, then the symptoms should start to improve as well.
Right, sorry, hi.
I thought I'd gone deaf.
Thank you, Marilyn. Andrea, are there any exercises, at least in those first 3 months, when it's likely almost everybody is going to be anticoagulated unless it wasn't appropriate for them at that time, that they should avoid or they should do with caution? You're muted now.
There we are. As Marilyn said, you've got to take it really easy. So I wouldn't advise anybody to, take up running or a lot of swimming, any kind of active sports at all, even, like hill walking or even sort of fast walking to, if they were going anywhere. I mean, people have to learn that they've got to slow down. And I think for some people, that's one of the things that they find most difficult, is that suddenly they can't do things at the pace that they were doing before. And it's just a question of being sensible and, walking before you can run. And, as the others have said, listening to your body. And if you feel tired, if the pain's increasing, if your legs are, or your arms or wherever the clot is starting to ache more, then rest and don't feel as if you're failing because you've got to rest more or go slower.
And really, this question, which is pre-submitted, probably first to Marilyn and to Andrea. As people begin to recover and take on more, there's often the report of feeling breathless and the worry and anxiety that arises around that. And could you share some information about why they might feel breathless? Because obviously we know that there's many reasons this could be. It might not be another clot, it might not be caused by the original clot, and how they can test out what is an okay breathlessness and when they ought to go back and talk to somebody.
I think part of it depends on what their baseline was before. So somebody who did a little amount of exercise, the sort of level of breathlessness might be different to somebody who normally did, 5K every week or more. So their expectation of their breathlessness might be different as well. Their age will come into it as to as they become older and maybe struggle more to mobilize long distances. It's a difficult one to answer. I can appreciate that if you're feeling short of breath, when you've had a history of a PE, then you're going to always have in the back of your mind, is this another PE? So that's always going to be there. And then along with that is a layer of anxiety that comes with it. So I'd imagine, not being a person who's had these, but having dealt with plenty of patients, that it's a sort of vicious circle almost, where you know in your head rationally that's probably not another PE, but there is an underlying anxiety that it might be that, and that sometimes will fuel it. So it's partly, I think, one of the things is learning how to deal with the anxiety about worrying about it. And I know there's a lot of information on Thrombosis UK about dealing with the sort of psychological aspects of having a PE or a DVT. And in regards to whether you feel this shortness of breath is more than it should be, again, as we've discussed with exercise, it's about starting slowly. And if you are trying to get back into doing some form of exercise, whether that's running or whatever, you're aiming to have a certain amount of breathlessness to achieve a good element of exercise. But you don't want so much that you are significantly breathless after you've stopped and it hasn't gone away. That should be a red flag.
Thank you. Natalie, you mentioned about going from your couch to 5K. So did you experience that breathlessness and concern about it? And how did you approach overcoming that?
I didn't experience any breathlessness, but I think that was purely because I didn't have a PE. It was in my arm, so I wasn't really, my hands used to swell. That used to worry me quite a lot. But I started running in what I call zone 1. So I worked out what my zone 1 heart rate should be, and I only ever ran in that heart rate. So I never really got out of breath. And then over time, what has happened is that I can now just run faster and further in that zone 1 heart rate. So yeah, I was very lucky not to have to experience any of that. I'm sure Caroline will have more to say on that one.
Caroline?
Yeah, I would say the reason I got breathless, and probably still do at times, is just my own expectation. So when you have been very active, then you want to run at the paces that you always run at, and that's just not achievable for me anymore. But that doesn't mean to say I can't go out and achieve my new targets. And for me, having a target, having something that I've signed up to and committed to, has really helped me be consistent. But yeah, I certainly do sometimes overdo it and get breathless. And sometimes to get fitter, you do have to mix it up a bit. You do have to get a bit breathless and push yourself a bit harder. But I would say only do that in your own comfort zone. So get a baseline fitness first and just build your confidence, and don't push too hard, because that will come with time. Like I've been running again now for another 3 years, and every year I see sort of smaller improvements. They're not massive leaps like I might have seen when I was younger, but now I've started to do a speed session every week to try and improve my fitness, and I'm more confident to do that. But I certainly wouldn't have been confident when I set out again to rebuild my fitness, because as all the panelists have said, it is that anxiety that you're going to go too hard. And I think because all my clots have been triggered by my running, I have definitely had a lot of anxiety in the past about that, but I'm on anticoagulation now, and I have just pushed that to one side. But that's with the experience of having achieved some things, really.
Thank you. Caroline, I don't know if you can higher your volume just a little bit. One or two people are saying you're a little bit quiet, but that...
Oh, sorry, I'll lift up my...
Oh,
is that
that's
better?
Sorry. That's better.
I don't know how I can do it. It's yeah, sometimes
that's
it works
better now.
perfectly and other times it doesn't. I'm so sorry.
No, that's fine, thank you. And actually you touched upon something, and I'll go to Marilyn and Andrea as well for this. And somebody in the question has asked about this. Being on an anticoagulant and maybe through exercise having minor traumas, what would be your advice to a person about reporting it? You know, when they go into, they've got a minor trauma, what should they always be telling their doctor or nurse, who's ever they see when they've had an injury?
Can I just go back to the previous about the shortness of breath? Sorry, Marilyn, didn't mean to interrupt you there. Can I just point out that not all shortness of breath is normal. People who do feel shortness of breath, people perhaps feel short of breath because they're feeling anxious, but sometimes shortness of breath is something's not right. And so if you do become shortness of breath, get shortness of breath acutely, or if you've got shortness of breath when you're resting, if you're coughing up any blood, if you've got any chest pain, lightheadedness, anything like that, you need to seek attention, particularly if you're in the very early stages of having a DVT or a PE, and particularly for people on warfarin, because sometimes when we're stabilizing the warfarin, if the INR isn't coming up to a therapeutic level, there is a risk that the clot can carry on forming and there could be other problems. So just be mindful that while it isn't unusual to feel breathless initially, perhaps because you're not used to doing exercise for a while or because you're anxious, it could be a sign that there is something happening. That's not to alarm anybody, but just to be aware of that. Sorry, Marilyn.
It's all right. I've forgotten the question. If somebody has a minor trauma, is that what you said?
Yeah.
I suppose it depends how you define a minor trauma, really. That
ligament, maybe. Let's say they've hurt their leg, they pull a ligament. What should they expect and what should they report? Or even a fall and they've cut themselves?
So a fall and they've cut themselves, and we would always advise people to apply pressure to the area slightly longer than you normally would, because the anticoagulant is interfering with the clotting process. And it would normally, or should normally, then coagulate and stop. If it doesn't, then the obvious thing is you need to get yourself to A&E to get checked out. If you've pulled something, a ligament, or strained something, and you need to go to A&E, it's always an interesting one with a leg, especially if you sustain an injury to your leg and you've had a previous history of a DVT. It's often quite difficult to extrapolate what the symptoms are. Are they related to the injury that you've sustained, or is it a new DVT happening? And it's really difficult to know, which is which. Depending on what the symptoms are, it's always best to get it checked out from a point of view if you're on your blood thinner, just in case there's some bleeding in the tissues, or if the trauma itself is significant enough, it might cause something that would bring on another DVT.
I am not medical, but something I would add just from my personal experience with being somebody on long-term anticoagulation is try and get the area cooled down. While you're hot, the blood keeps pumping, doesn't it? It just flows. And we found that was quite like pressure and coolness, we found helped. There's been a really good comment, actually, and Annya, I think you may want to comment on this as well, from Naomi in the chat. And she said, this isn't a question, but a comment. She had CBT to help with her breathlessness after her PE 20 years ago. She had a refresher session recently to help with a recent DVT. It really helped, but it takes a massive psychological effort. And I know the charity has information on this, and I'm sure you can share some things.
Yeah, it's well, I myself personally, I think that the psychological damage that the VTE causes is just as profound as the physical effects. I get calls all the time from people that are hypervigilant, over anxious, sleepless, and I'm really glad that we're now getting to the stage where we've got a really nice section on our website about the psychological impact of VTE. It took a long time to actually get this brought to the forefront, you know, because there are many doctors that just thought, oh, it's fine, you know, you're on anticoagulants, you're fine. And I know for a fact, I know myself, you know, I've had clots myself, and my most recent one was nearly 40 years ago, but I still sometimes, if I get a cold like I've got now, or if it's very cold weather or something, I get a pain here because I do have a lot of scar tissue in this lung, and there's a little bit in the back of my mind going and if that can happen to me after 40 years, then, you know, somebody who's very fresh to it, it's really raw for them. And I'm really interested in the fact that we've now got you know, proper professional help on board. I mean, I'm a sort of level 1 counsellor. I do CBT, I do mindfulness. We're hoping at some point later on in the year to reopen the mindfulness group we had right in the middle of COVID, where all the anxiety around COVID related clotting and vaccine related clotting came in, and a lot of people were just hanging off by their claws. So we used to have a group once a week, and then we had coffee and chat, which was very popular, and we hope we can get that going again. But yeah, I would always say, please, please, please don't be afraid to go and ask for help. I know it's difficult because, you know, that the waiting list for counselling is like miles long now, but you know, always open up about it, always recognise the fact that you are feeling overly anxious, try and get some support. And if you can't get support anywhere else, you can always give me a call or drop me an email, and I'm quite happy to do some one-to-one work with anybody who's got problems with anxiety.
Thank you.
Go on. No, I was just going to add to that. In some areas, if they've got an anticoagulation nurse specialist or a thrombosis nurse, you could ring your local hospital and ask to speak to them if you're concerned. And well, for myself, I have people ringing me up who I've never met, but they've got real anxieties. And sometimes just talking to somebody who understands you know, the complexities of a blood clot and the treatment that you're undertaking, it can be really helpful, and it can put people's fears to rest a little bit. So you know, if anybody, just see if you've got an anticoagulation nurse specialist or thrombosis nurse at your local hospital, has to be put through to them, and see if you can, you know, catch them for a chat. Or as Annya said, you know, Thrombosis UK is a really good resource. And I know Annya always likes to have a chat with people, so he's your man.
In fact, recently, we're still in the middle of it, but the charity has run a freedom of information request to all NHS England health boards and about the services they offer. And one was about psychological services. Now, while this is very mixed response, quite a few, while they may not have had a trained counsellor, did say, we have nurses who can talk and listen to patients, and you know, that can never ever be underestimated. It's so valuable. What made me smile though, some did say we refer them to Thrombosis UK, and that was sort of their policy. That was their psychological policy. But at least they're acknowledging that if people need help, and there may be an avenue for help here, so they have an answer to anybody asking, and it's always worth asking. Sorry, Natalie, going back to you now, I have to remember what the question was. Yeah, so having, you and Caroline really, in recovering, did you find you were more tired as well, having had a clot? We have a question here, and I think it's a really complex question, to be honest. I think there's lots of things going on there, which I'm sure Marilyn and Andrea will say, but there's a lady who had a pee at 20 weeks while she was pregnant, and it took a while for it to be diagnosed. They thought it was pneumonia initially. The baby is now 3 months old, and she is exhausted. But the hardest thing is understanding whether the exhaustion is from the clot or the newborn baby or both. I think anybody here would like to chip in about how they felt after having a blood clot, how tired they were, because obviously a newborn baby will always, my experience of a newborn baby is They'll keep you tired until they're about 18 and you're wondering where they are. But, you know,
beyond.
Yes, I know. But it is exhausting. And so to have had a PE on top of that, and the anxiety of that being during pregnancy, is almost unimaginable. And you must be, my heart goes to you, and you must be absolutely exhausted recovering. But Natalie, when and Caroline, when you were recovering, obviously, different types of clots are not during pregnancy, but did you experience tiredness that you hadn't normally felt before? Caroline,
totally exhausted all the time. I went to bed before my children for many months, and it is that stage of early diagnosis where you just don't imagine you're ever going to get your energy back. You go into that real dark place sometimes where you just think, God, is this what it's going to be like for the next few years? But actually, if you just keep check, you can see as the months go on that starts to lift. But it is really, really tiring, I would say. I mean, my most recent clot was 2018, and I remember I don't know if anyone remembers Orinoco in the Wombles, but I was sleeping everywhere. If I could have a little snooze, I would take a snooze. So yes, and having a baby on top of that, I simply can't imagine having to function. So I know everyone says sleep when your baby sleeps, but if you can do as much of that as you can, I would be right in your corner.
I think the other thing you should remember is we were in a pandemic at the time, and that's been extremely draining. With everything that's going on in the world, on top of, you're sitting there with your little baby, you're looking at what's happening in Ukraine, you're looking at this COVID pandemic. I don't know if the lady's had COVID herself. If she has, there might be a little element of, post-COVID. And having a baby and 2 other children, it's exhausting. And 3 months is not that long after having the baby, and everything else that went on with it, and all the anxiety and everything else that's going on in the world. And although you might think, well, it does affect, it affects all of us, because we're in the middle of it, because there are so many anxieties coming out of all of that on top of everything else. So I think you're probably quite entitled to feel completely worn out, and hopefully look after yourself, treat yourself nicely, be kind to yourself, and hopefully with time you'll start to feel more lively. And now the weather's picking up, that'll help as well.
I think the fact that you're even joining here tonight, you are doing brilliantly. It's just, it's so hard having those 2 things together, but you're probably doing better than you realize yourself. Natalie, how did you find it? Were you affected by tiredness?
Yeah, I was extremely exhausted in the early days, and like Caroline, for quite a few months. I find, to be honest, sorry, there's a fly, it's doing I still get quite tired, and I've noticed that if my INR is not, because I'm on warfarin, if my INR is not stable, I find that can make me feel extremely tired. And again, for me, it is about knowing your body. And if you need to rest, we shouldn't feel guilty for taking that rest. I mean, to have a baby, and I'm so glad my children were older, because I was exhausted. I was. And now I am very mindful to ensure it's easier for me. My children are 17 and 15. I can sleep when I want to, but I make sure that I do rest. If I feel like I'm getting really quite fatigued, I'll just go and have a little nap. It's terrible.
I think that's really wise advice. And I think if the lady can get any family or friends or neighbours help at all, to take all the help she can.
Yeah, it must be so tough.
Herself to rest.
What a warrior.
Yeah. There's been also a really good question come in, and probably this is more for Andrea and Marilyn, but if somebody's had a blood clot and they have a stent fitted, or anything like that, does that affect the exercise tolerance or the exercise that they can do? Obviously, there's the immediate recovery from it, but long term, should that have any impact on what they can do or should consider doing or not?
I did start answering this question because I was
Oh,
wondering
very well.
if they've had a stent. I think they'd had a stent and thrombolysis from what I read. So I think they had a big clot, iliofemoral clot, so what we class as a big clot right up in the groin. So stent or no stent, that's going to cause some significant symptoms in the leg. Hopefully the successful thrombolysis will help those symptoms significantly. I asked the poster whether he was on an anticoagulant or not, but I don't know if he's replied to that as yet. I can't see it anymore, so I don't know. But in regards to what was the question?
Having
recovery.
Yeah, or anything that you should be more cautious of or avoid when you're
with a filter in or a stent. With a stent in. No, it's in the same way. This is a different form of management of this clot, and is used in sort of more significant situations where there's normally a big blood clot, where it really needs addressing. So it would be a case of just taking it slowly. As I said, I think in my reply to him, as we've been talking about all evening, it's just a slow process. This is likely to be from a big blood clot, so that process will probably be at the slower end of the scale than maybe somebody who had a tiny little blood clot in the calf, for example.
And we've mentioned about doing a range of exercises, and maybe some exercises being more cautious of when you're first recovering. So more strenuous ones, hill walking, even contact ones, maybe if you're on an anticoagulant. But somebody who sort of is slightly further on their journey had sent in a question, and I think hopefully Natalie and Caroline, you might be able to help on this. She's asked, what's a good way to get back to swimming? She's had multiple DVTs and PEs, and she has CTE-PH, but would love to swim again. And it seems like a massive step, though, with everything it entails, and one I definitely couldn't do at the moment without working up to it, such as just getting into the pool or getting changed and going to the pool and dealing with the changing temperatures, because all of them are tiring by themselves. With running, it looks like a more straightforward pathway, but how would you advise or consider gradually getting back into swimming? Can I go to Natalie first, maybe?
For me, it would be, I've never swum, so sorry. But for me, I think it would be just like every other exercise that you want to start introducing to your body. Just do it really gradually. Listen to your body. If you need any sort of medical advice, speak to your anticoagulation nurse or whoever it is that you need to speak to, but just really very small gradual steps. So if the first time you go, all you do is get in the pool, and then the next time you maybe do a length and then 2 lengths, and then over time you build it up and get to where it is that you want to be, because you'll know whether or not that's fitting with you and whether or not it's something that you wish to continue with. So just really gradual, just like every other exercise.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, well, my view for me is I'm lucky in my local area. I have a heated Lido. So the benefit for me is that you don't have that massive sensory experience of all the echoing in a swimming pool. It's heated, so you don't have to worry about the temperature, which really does have an effect on my leg even now. I'm wondering whether the lady in her area could approach her GP and ask if there's any options for any hydrotherapy sessions, much like are offered to hip replacement patients, whether the GP referral could happen as a sort of social care referral to be able to get back into exercise. Most GPs will support some kind of social care referral, and there may be, a private hospital with a heated pool where she could go for some sessions to get going and get over some of those initial concerns, and get a program from a physio to build up. That would be what I would try and do if I was in that position, I think.
Yeah, that's really good ideas. Thank you. Andrea, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, the pool I go to, there's quite a lot of people go there and they don't actually swim. They just walk very well, as either quickly or slowly, whichever they feel able to do, in the depth of water they feel most comfortable, and they walk in the pool, which I think is a good idea, because it's a good way to gently, get back into being in the water and strengthening yourself up before you then feel able to actually start, swimming properly. So maybe that's something, you could try.
And I think it's always worth reminding yourself that in water, there's an added resistance, isn't there? So whether you're walking or swimming, you're working your body. So it is, if you only walk from one side of the pool to the other, you are beginning to exercise a little bit more than if you walked from one side to the other. So everything is a progression. Yeah. Thank you. And then we have a lot of thank yous coming in as well. But another question that was pre-submitted was, and they were especially interested really in the running side, was in building up to do longer distances, were there any tips that Carol or Natalie could give, and how they gradually built up to go beyond that 5K mark? And when they had setbacks, how did they deal with that? So Caroline, shall I go to you first? I can't hear you, Caroline.
Oh, hang on. Sorry, thank you for the reminder. My running group call me the comeback queen. I have regular setbacks and I need to take breaks, but I could only talk about really the building up to the London Marathon last time, and I'll be doing it again this year. So Natalie, I shall see you there. And some half marathons that I've done in between. I've just done, as Natalie advised at the very beginning, just really listened to my body. So I've only done 2 long runs consecutively in 2 weeks, and then maybe taken a week off or another couple of weeks off before I've tried an even longer distance run, but done base level runs in between. So 5 to 6 kilometers during the week, 2 or 3 times a week, and then a longer run at the weekend when I've got a bit more time. But I've taken snacks and I've taken drink, and I'll sit on a stone and take a break. I'm not worried about the speed. It's just about covering the distance and the time on your feet. And the research tells us that actually, to be successful at running longer distances, it's more about the time on your feet than it is about running it. So if you went for the same distance walk, you can get just as fit if you want to run a long race. So you can imagine that I've done a lot of reading as well to look at different ways. And there's some really good advice in books like the 80-20 method. And the 80-20 says, take it really easy for 80% of the time and only push yourself for 20% of the time as you're building up. And that's the most successful athletes take that approach. So if that works for them, I'm really happy to take that approach. And that certainly has worked for me.
Yeah, brilliant. How about for you, Natalie?
Very much along the same lines as Caroline. I don't push to do it in any sort of time. It's more about the distance covered. I did make a big mistake before my half marathon, and I did push myself a little too hard, and then after the half marathon I completely crashed. So I've learned not to do that going forward, but it is very much, I will do the same thing. So I'll do maybe 2 or 3 short runs during the week, and then at the weekend when I have more time. And it really is just about enjoying the run, not about the time that it takes me to do it. I never try and improve on my time. What happens, what the results on Strava don't mean anything to me. All I'm looking at is covering the distance. So, for me, the London Marathon, if I'm still there at 8 o'clock helping people clear up, so be it. But at least I've done it.
So sensible, and a sort of thing that's gone from the very start is about listening to yourself, and it's about fulfilling yourself and just pacing, not trying to beat somebody else, always looking at the time. It's sustaining it, really, and sustaining is very hard. Somebody in the chat has also mentioned, obviously we've talked about running and swimming, hill walking, all sorts of things like that, but there are other activities that you can do that can also be really beneficial to you, such as yoga, Pilates, Tai Chi. I know, do you still do kickboxing, Natalie?
I haven't as of yet. I do plan on going back to kickboxing, but because I've been training for races, I kind of haven't. I just want to concentrate on one thing, but I watch with this space, because next year I will get my black belt.
Okay. That was brilliant, thank you. I think we have answered almost everybody's. There's one last question. So what length of time would be expected to be back to full respiratory function? Oh, this is a hard one. Following a bilateral saddle PE.
Oh, God.
Where no more breathlessness is experienced on regular walking on flat surface. So that is a tough one. And some of it will draw upon what we've said before, such as where were you before? At what level were you before? But would anybody like to take that one? I think you're all very capable of answering.
I think when you've had a bilateral saddle PE, that in itself is a big clot, and it's going to take some time for you to get back to a level of normality. You might never get back to completely what you were before. As we've been talking about, you have a new normal, but I think it's impossible to say it's going to take this long. Because everybody's so different, and it's going to be just a case of pacing, and not sort of trying to run before you can walk, to quote a phrase, just taking it slowly, and sort of every little win is a win, sort of thing. Every little a bit further you walk is a gain. So congratulate yourself on every time you do a little bit more, and don't be downhearted about it.
On Tuesday, we had a meeting. It was asking questions, and one of the speakers there, Sean, who had experienced several blood clots, including PEs. I mean, he'd been a fell runner beforehand, and he felt that he was never going to get back to fitness at all. And it took him many years before he managed to climb again. But he said, at that point, I wasn't expecting to not be breathless, or I wasn't expecting to do it in a certain time. I just enjoyed doing it, and I even enjoyed it more for doing it with who I was with, because I never thought I would do it again. And I lived for my new normal and in that time. And I think they were really, really wise words on anything we do, is realizing how far we've come and how well we've done. We're almost out of time, but what I'd love to do is just go around, if you're happy, with either one last tip or comment about how you felt, or about getting active and following a blood clot. If I start with Annya, who's obviously from the charity, and your sort of tips that you give to people when they contact you.
Don't expect too much too soon. Try and be stoical about what you can and can't do. Be very mindful and be in the moment. And any exercise is better than no exercise at all.
Natalie, can I come to you? Because I know you started a group as well. So there was that, they weren't close friends, they were strangers, but that support and how that helped.
Yeah, the group on Facebook helped me immensely. It's grown literally to almost 1,000 people now, and they all help each other. They all reach out to each other. They share their successes. It's absolutely amazing. And for me, the one thing that I would say to anybody is to be kind to yourself. Don't beat yourself up for what you can't do. Praise yourself for what you've managed to do. That's kind of the way that I look at it.
Caroline, with your history of blood clots and a long time recovery, what benefit? Well, how do you feel that actually in recovering and in taking up exercise or activity, it's helped you in your recovery? What would your guidance to people be for that?
I mean, I can't add a huge amount.
Sorry, can I ask you to?
I can't add a huge amount to what has been said already through the evening. I would just say my best tip is to be consistent. So if you're feeling up to it, go don't make excuses, because 10 minutes after getting out of the door, you'll thank yourself for going. And if you've had enough after 10 minutes, just turn around and come back. It doesn't matter. It does take a long time. Just thinking about the gentleman with the stent, my first clot was massive. Stents weren't on offer back then. It took me 2 years really to get going again. But it was about being consistent, and yeah, I just wish everybody the best really. Don't worry if you don't meet your target. Just keep making attempts really. And if you can't run, just walk, just go out the door, because the benefits to your mental health will outweigh anything you get via fitness, really.
Thank you. Andrea, somebody's recovering from a clot and they're worried. Who can they on their medical team, who should they talk to get any advice, or where would you signpost them? You're on mute, sorry.
Sorry,
it.
the dog was chuntering. Generally, I talk to people first myself, or the anticoagulation nurse, thrombosis nurse is a good protocol. I mean, Marilyn, in her DVT specialist nurse position, an absolute wealth of information. If we can't answer the questions for the patient, then possibly maybe direct them towards their GP, directed people towards counsellors. If the situation warrants it, maybe haematologist. Marilyn works very closely in the haematology department. I work in medicine. So it depends. It depends what the problem is that the patient has, and if we can address it, we will, and if we can't address it, then generally we will know who to try, signpost the patient to get the answer. And if they can't get the answer there, they can come back to us and we'll try something else.
And never really be afraid to go back and ask and have that conversation.
Oh yeah, always ask. Yeah.
Always ask, be reassured. And Marilyn, you obviously see patients on a daily basis. What advice do you give them as when they're leaving you about getting back to activity? Your sort of top tip for that one.
Well, just tapping onto the end of what you just said, we always say no question is a daft question. So they often worry about ringing us about something because they think, oh, it's a silly thing to ask. There's no such thing as a silly thing to ask. Everything is relevant. So I think basically what we've said all the way through this last hour is to do something as opposed to do nothing. They worry about when they leave us and go out to the door, whether they can walk when they get back to the house. Patients often remember some of what you said, and there's an awful lot of information to take in when you've been diagnosed with a new blood clot, as well as the anxiety around it, the medication that you've got to take. There's a huge amount of things to take in. So the most important thing for us is to tell them, here's our phone number, ring us back when you've got a number of other questions, and just take it slowly, step by step.
Thank you. And I can see one more question is coming in. So for the support groups, obviously Thrombosis UK have the Thrombosis UK closed Facebook and open Facebook pages. But Natalie, could you also share the name of the activity or exercise group that you have established, please?
Yeah, so our group is called Embolism to Exercise, and it's on Facebook, and currently we're doing Movement May because we set challenges each month to get people back out and walking. It's
really good, isn't it? Because it starts with very small challenges, and it is everybody's individual level, isn't it?
Yeah, and we just obviously everybody's at a different level, so it kind of does it's a massive general, we all just chip in. So this month it's steps for May, so yeah, come and join us.
Brilliant, thank you. And for anybody who hasn't seen it, there is also on the Thrombosis UK website a short film with two specialist physiotherapists who specialise, or one of their specialities is in VT recovery, and it shows you some of the very basic things you can do even inside your house to start getting active. So I think across the board, from this evening the Facebook pages and also Natalie's Facebook. There's a lot of support, one-to-one, group and film and reading out there. So thank you to everybody who joined tonight. Thank you especially to all the panel who gave their time to come along. Really, really grateful to you. Thank you. I know it will benefit. And this recording, you can see coming in on the chat, thank you. This recording will go up on the website very shortly so that you can go back to it and others can also access it. But for now, thank you so much. Bye-bye.